The bells of St. Bridget's Church in Savannah, Georgia, were not just ringing, they were cannon shots of celebration echoing over the humid air of the Low Country. Inside, the vaulted ceilings held the scent of lilies and old polish, the air thick with anticipation. Ava Moreno, 27 years old and radiant in borrowed ivory, stood at the altar. Her world, for this one moment, felt stable. Her daughter, Poppy, barely 6 years old, stood beside her, a miniature version of bridal seriousness, clutching a bouquet of baby's breath so tightly her knuckles were white. The sunlight, fractured by the towering stained glass depiction of the Annunciation, painted the white aisle runner in jewel tones of ruby and sapphire. The officiant smiled, his voice bouncing gently off the heavy oak pews. "And do you, Ethan Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" All eyes were on Ethan. His suit was perfect, his blonde hair meticulously combed. He looked like the very picture of the stability Ava had always wanted, not for herself, but for Poppy. He opened his mouth, the silence stretched, pulling thin. No, it was not a shout, but it was not a whisper. It was a sterile, cold word that landed in the center of the church and shattered the stained glass light. A collective gasp was stolen from the air. Before that gasp could turn into a full-throated murmur, a different sound pulled focus. The heavy thud of the oak doors at the back of the nave swinging open, hitting the stone walls with a resounding crack. They did not enter. They made an entrance. A column of men in immaculate black suits, moving with the fluid, synchronized silence of predators. They parted the stunned, craning guests like a ship's bow cutting through water. Leading them was a man who seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, Luca Farrell. Even in Savannah, a city that prided itself on minding its own business, the name Marrow Syndicate was spoken in hushed tones, and Farrell was its face. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be a headline, a rumor, a ghost story for the docks. His advance slowed, then stopped entirely, halfway down the aisle. He was not looking at the panicked groom. He was looking at Ava. A shaft of sapphire light from the window cut across the space, catching Ava's left wrist as she instinctively reached for Poppy's hand. And on that wrist, stark against her skin, was a small, delicate tattoo, a butterfly, its wings detailed, hovering above a short string of Roman numerals. The air left Luca Farrell's lungs. He froze, to his men. The stillness was more terrifying than any shout. The light hit the ink. It was the farfalla, the butterfly mark, the secret crest of the safe haven his mother had run decades ago, a subterranean railroad for the children of witnesses who had nowhere else to turn. He looked from the tattoo to her face, the high cheekbones, the dark, terrified eyes. "She's mine." Luca spoke the words just loudly enough to carry over the confused murmuring. The effect was immediate. Every pew fell silent. The officiant froze. The silence broke Ethan. He backed away from the altar, stumbling on the step, his face pale and slick with sweat. I can't," he stammered, his eyes darting between Ava and the black-suited men now lining the aisle. "They're watching. Ava, the IAOCB." He spat the acronym, the Interstate Anti-Organized Crime Bureau. "They are all over me, and they are all over you." He pointed a shaking finger at her, the accusation ringing false and desperate. "I can't get married to someone entangled. You brought this. You brought the Mafia to our wedding." Ava went numb. The blood drained from her face, leaving her feeling hollow. A porcelain doll dropped on stone, but the numbness was a shield. She turned, her movements stiff, and pulled Poppy into the folds of her dress, shielding her daughter's face from the man dissolving at the altar. Luca Farrell moved. He ignored Ethan completely, his focus locked on Ava's wrist. He walked up the altar steps, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the stone. He stopped a respectful distance from her, his gaze dropping to the ink. He recognized the numerals. He knew them. They were a protection code, one that matched a specific file, a very old, very cold file, a missing girl, declared lost in 2006, Isabel Moreno, Ava's mother. Behind him, his security team fanned out. 2 men moved to the heavy oak doors, the click of the locks echoing loudly in the sudden quiet. They were sealing the church. No press, no escape. The whispers from the guests, trapped in the pews, rose from confusion to a low roar of panic. Ethan saw his opening, while all eyes were on the tableau at the altar. He bolted. He scrambled down the side steps and fled through the sacristy door, the sound of his running feet cowardly and final. Ava watched him go, the last 9 months of her life disappearing down a hallway. "He's gone," Luca said. His voice was deep, a rumble of gravel and velvet. Ava turned back to him, her veil tangled, her daughter clinging to her leg. "You are a Farfalla child," Luca stated. It was not a question. "By the old laws, by my mother's laws, that mark makes you one of mine." Ava flinched at the word mine, but his tone held no threat. It held finality. "This," he said, gesturing to the empty space where Ethan had stood, "was a mistake, but I am offering protection, immediate protection." Ava looked at the locked doors. She looked at the man who had abandoned her, and the man who claimed her. The lilies suddenly smelled funereal. She ripped the bouquet of baby's breath from Poppy's tight grip, the stems snapping. She threw it aside. It skittered across the marble. She looked Luca Farrell dead in the eyes, the tremor starting in her hands but absent from her voice. "Protect me how—" The question hung in the air, sharper than any vow, and on her wrist, beneath the gaze of the saints in the glass, the small butterfly seemed to vibrate with the frantic, terrified pulse beating just beneath the skin. The sacristy smelled of old wax and snuffed-out candles. The heavy door shut, sealing them off from the panicked whispers in the nave. Luca's men were efficient. One had spirited the confused guests out a side exit, while another had taken a bewildered Poppy to the parish kitchen with the promise of juice. His movements gentle, practiced. Now, it was just Ava, Luca, and a man in a pinstripe suit who had emerged from the shadows. He introduced himself as Arlo McKinnon, from the firm of McKinnon and Pierce. He carried a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. Ava was still in her wedding dress, a cruel joke of ivory and lace that felt like a shroud. "You have," Luca began, his voice calm, "approximately 48 hours. He did not sit, but prowled the small, cold room, his presence shrinking the space. Ethan Hale's public desertion was not an act of cowardice. It was a signal. The IAOCB unit he's been cooperating with just lost their primary angle on you. They will now move to Plan B." Plan B, Ava's voice was hollow. "Taking you," Luca said flatly. "And the child, they will file an emergency motion, claim you are an accessory to your mother's alleged activities, and place you both in the federal protection system. You will lose everything: your name, your home, your job, and most importantly, your parental autonomy. Poppy will become a ward of the state, hidden with you, but not under your control." He stopped in front of a dark, unlit fireplace. "Or, there is my option. The Farfalla Fund is not just a memory. It is a legal, heavily endowed charitable trust funded by the Marrow Syndicate. It has a charter, one with a very specific clause for descendants." "Mr." McKinnon stepped forward, placing the portfolio on a heavy desk. "He's referring to a humanitarian protection contract," the lawyer said, his voice smooth. "A nominal marriage agreement. It would, in the eyes of the state, give you immediate access to Mr. Farrell's legal and financial shielding. It activates the fund's resources. The IAOCB cannot simply seize the wife of Luca Farrell." Ava looked at the man who had just blown up her life to save it. A marriage. "Of paper," Luca clarified. "A legal fortress. Nothing more, unless you wished it." Ava's head was spinning. She pushed back. "I will not sign anything blind. Not after this." She stood taller. The bride that was disappearing, replaced by the mother. Poppy is the only thing that matters. If I sign anything, I demand absolute, non-negotiable, sole authority over her, her education, her medical care. We are not separated, ever. I don't care what paper you put in front of me. That is the first and last clause." "That," Luca said with a nod of approval, "is not a problem. It is the entire point." The sacristy door creaked open. The old officiant, Father Michael, peered in, his face etched with concern. "My child," he said, ignoring the other men, his gaze settling on Ava. "This is a storm." "Father, Luca's mother," he interrupted gently. "Mattia Farrell. She founded the Farfalla Refuge in the basement of this very parish, 30 years ago. I gave the last rites to children she saved." He looked at the ink on her wrist. "That mark has roots in this ground, whatever else this man is. He honors his mother's work." It was not an endorsement. It was context. As if summoned by the chaos. Ava's phone, tucked into a small satin bag, began to buzz. She fumbled for it. A blocked number. She stared at it. "Answer it, no?" Luca commanded, his eyes suddenly hard. She did. "Hello." A voice, metallic and distorted, whispered through the receiver. "Isabel's brat. You were supposed to be clean. The mark is a liability. Get rid of it. Remove the tattoo, or the girl disappears." The line clicked dead. Ava's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob as the icy terror finally broke through her shock. Before she could collapse, Luca was at her side. He did not touch her, but his presence was a wall. He took the phone from her shaking hand and handed it to McKinnon, who slipped it into a foil-lined evidence bag. "They are already moving," Luca said. He pulled a slim tablet from his inside jacket pocket and tapped the screen. He showed her an image, a still frame from a video feed. "This is from the security camera in the church dome. Timestamp, 10 minutes before the ceremony." It was Ethan. He was standing near the entrance, talking to a man in a nondescript suit. He was smiling. "That," Luca said, "is Special Agent Rowan Cade of the IAOCB. He was not here to arrest you. He was with your fiancé. Ethan was not just a source, he was a partner." The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that Ava felt the floor tilt. Then, her phone buzzed in the evidence bag. McKinnon raised an eyebrow. Luca nodded. The lawyer carefully retrieved it. A text message from Ethan. "Ava, don't trust him. He's a monster. He'll use you. That tattoo is a commodity. He just wants to sell the code to the North Pier Union." It was a clumsy, desperate attempt to poison the well, but the mention of a name, North Pier Union, made Luca's jaw tighten. Ava wiped the tears from her face with a defiant, angry motion. She was a cornered animal, with only one cub to protect. She looked at the contract on the desk. She would not sign it. Not yet. Not the marriage. But she could not stay. "I will not sign this today," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I don't know who to believe, and I will not be forced into another vow." "That is your choice," Luca said. "But they threaten Poppy." The words were a bitter admission of defeat. "If you have a place, a safe house." "We will leave now," Luca said. "I will go," Ava said, meeting his intense gaze. "Not as your paper bride, but as a guest of the Farfalla. For my daughter. Only for my daughter." Luca nodded. It was enough. As they moved to the door, he paused and looked at her wrist, where the small butterfly lay exposed. His fingers hovered over the ink, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, but he did not make contact. "This," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was just for her. "This isn't a shackle. It's a key." The black sedan moved through Savannah's shadowed streets like a phantom, leaving the historic district's Spanish moss and gas lamps for the sharp, modern lines of the industrial riverfront. They passed the massive container ships, silent giants in the darkness, before turning onto a private, unmarked road. The house, if it could be called that, was named Sea Glass. It was not a home. It was a statement, a fortress of cantilevered steel and glass perched over the deep, churning water of the Savannah River. It was cold, beautiful, and utterly impenetrable. The entire river-facing side was made of ballistic-grade glass, reflecting the city lights from the far bank like captured stars. Inside, the sterile quiet was broken only by a soft, bubbling sound. Poppy, her 6-year-old resilience kicking in now that the scary church was gone, ran ahead. Fish. In the center of the vast minimalist living room was a massive, museum-quality koi pond sunk into the floor, visible through a glass partition. Bright orange and white fish swirled beneath the surface. Poppy pressed her hands to the glass, giggling for the first time in hours. The sound was a small, bright bird in a steel cage. "She will be safe here," Luca said, his voice softer as he watched his men bring in Ava's hastily packed bags. "There is an orangery in the back. The glass is 3 inches thick. The air is filtered." Ava, still feeling the phantom weight of the wedding dress she had changed out of in a gas station bathroom, only nodded. "I need to understand," Ava said later, after Poppy was asleep in a room filled with more toys than she had ever owned. "Everything." Luca led her not to an office, but to a library. It was the only warm room in the house, paneled in dark wood, smelling of leather and sea air. He pressed a section of the wall, and a panel slid open, revealing a climate-controlled archive. "This," he said, "is the Farfalla room." It was lined with gray, acid-free archival boxes. He pulled one down. "Your mother, Isabel Moreno." He opened it. Inside were not just files, but black and white photographs, grainy surveillance stills. A young woman with Ava's eyes, laughing outside a diner. The same woman, her face harder, standing on a loading dock. "Your mother was not just a runaway," Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral. "She was an infiltrator. She was gathering intelligence inside the North Pier Union for a federal task force. On the North Pier Union, the name Ethan are rivals," Luca cut in. "And it seems your mother's executioners. The task force abandoned her. She turned to my mother for protection, for a way out for you. She died before they could finalize the extraction." He then showed her a leather-bound ledger. "The butterfly cipher. The mark on your wrist is not just an identifier. It is half of a key. The numerals." He pointed to her tattoo. "Are matched to a corresponding set on the child's guardian in this case, your mother. But she never received hers. Yours points to a safe deposit box at a small bank in Tybee Island." As the weight of her mother's secret life settled on her, Arlo McKinnon, the lawyer, entered. He was carrying a tablet. We recovered, mister. Hale's cloud data," McKinnon said, his voice precise. He showed her the screen, emails, texts, transcripts. It was all there. Ethan, the kind, stable man who read Poppy bedtime stories, had been a confidential informant for the IAOCB for 2 years. He had been assigned to get close to Ava, leveraging her mother's cold case. He had used Poppy's affection, her school plays, her asthma attacks, as leverage to build a life that was a complete fabrication. His entire proposal was a setup to gain access to whatever the tattoo unlocked. Ava felt sick. The man she had almost married had not just been lying, he had been mining her life, and her daughter's, for a promotion. "This is why we must formalize the protection," McKinnon pressed gently. "The IAOCB will not stop. They believe you have the key to dismantling the North Pier Union, and the Union believes the same. You and Poppy are trapped between them." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, a gentle contract. He called it, "We are not filing for the marriage license. Not yet. This is an interim document, a humanitarian protection agreement under the Farfalla Charter. It grants Mr. Feral emergency guardianship rights only in the event you are incapacitated or detained, allowing him to legally block any state agency from taking Poppy. It is not romantic, it is armor." Luca had been silent. He now stepped forward, holding a small, brightly colored bracelet. It looked like a child's toy. He knelt. Not in front of Ava, but as if Poppy were there, "I will give this to Poppy in the morning," he said to Ava. "It has a hidden button. If she is ever scared, or if anyone tries to take her, she presses it. It sends an alert directly to me and my team, no one else." He stood and looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "And I will give you my word, my rules. I will not cross a boundary you set. My team will protect you, but I will not touch you. Any contact, any conversation will be initiated by you. You are a guest of the Farfalla, not a prisoner of the syndicate." As if on cue, the large television in the library flickered to life, muted. One of Luca's men had turned it on. It was Channel 12 Coastal News. The chyron read, "Local bride abandoned at altar, rescued by reclusive philanthropist Luca Farrell." The footage was grainy, shot on a cell phone from inside the church. It showed Ethan fleeing. It showed Luca walking up the aisle. "A mixed blessing," McKinnon murmured. "Half the city thinks he's a monster. The other half thinks he's a saint." The pressure was immense, a physical weight from the city, the feds, and the rivals in the shadows. Ava looked at the pen. She looked at the document. It was not a marriage. It was not a vow of love. It was a choice, the first one she had made all day that was truly her own. She picked up the pen. She signed the Farfalla Protection Agreement. The signature was firm, the ink black against the cream paper. She had not signed the marriage contract. That remained on the desk, untouched, a question mark hanging in the air between them. The first dinner at Seaglass was a quiet, surreal affair. A housekeeper, who had appeared as silently as the security men, had prepared a simple pasta. Poppy, now wearing a bright yellow bracelet, was perched on a stool at the vast kitchen island. Luca sat opposite her. He had removed his suit jacket and with his sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked less like a syndicate boss and more like a tired man. He was meticulously cutting Poppy's spaghetti into manageable, non-slurping-sized bites. Ava watched, her own food untouched. "My mother," Luca said, his voice a low rumble in the cavernous room. "She started what she called La Casa delle Farfalle, the House of Butterflies. It was in the basement of St. Bridget's, mostly. She said every child deserved one safe place to land." Poppy, processing this with a 6-year-old's literalism, pointed her fork at him. "Your mom liked butterflies. Is that why you came to the church?" "Something like that," Luca said. "So you're like Mr. Butterfly?" A ghost of a smile touched Luca's mouth. "You can call me Luca, Poppy." "Okay, Mr. Butterfly," she said, and took a large bite of pasta. Later, after Poppy was asleep, Ava found Luca in the glass-walled living room, looking out at the river's black water. He was on the phone. Ava did not mean to eavesdrop, but his voice was cold, sharp, and it carried. "No," he said, "you don't touch him. The North Pier Union leaned on one of the dock merchants. You find out what they took. You triple it, and you deliver it to his house. From us. Then you have McKinnon file an injunction against the union for predatory practices. We will bleed them in court, not in the street. Understood." He hung up and saw her standing there. He offered no apology. "A crisis," he said simply. "A merchant was being extorted for a protection tax. It's been handled." By giving him money and suing, Ava asked. Confused, she had expected different. "Violence is messy," Luca said, turning to face her. "It's loud. It makes the IAOCB twitchy. What my rivals fear more than a bullet is a subpoena. My way is cleaner." The next day, one of Luca's men, a former military woman with a quiet demeanor, led Ava to a wing of the house she had not seen. It was a state-of-the-art simulation range. A massive screen depicted a parking garage. "You need to be able to defend yourself," the woman said. "This is not a suggestion." Ava picked up the weighted training pistol. It felt impossibly heavy. Her first shots at the digital target were wide, hitting a concrete pillar. "You're anticipating the recoil," a voice said from directly behind her. Luca. She'd not heard him enter. He stepped into her space, his body heat a palpable thing. He did not touch her waist, but his hand closed over hers on the grip, adjusting her fingers. His other hand gently moved to her elbow, steadying her arm. "Breathe out after the trigger breaks," he murmured, his breath brushing the shell of her ear. "Don't aim. Just point. Look at where you want the shot to go. See it. The rest is just mechanics." His chest was against her back, his chin just above her head. Ava could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart. She could smell the scent of clean cotton and something metallic, like the river. A small, involuntary spark ignited deep in her stomach, confusing and unwanted. She held her breath, squeezed the trigger. The shot on the screen was a perfect center. She pulled away, flustered, the heat rising in her neck. I think I get it." Luca stepped back, his expression unreadable, giving her the space she had just reclaimed. The warmth of that moment was shattered later that night by a sound Ava knew better than her own heartbeat, a dry, tight cough from Poppy's room, a wheeze. Ava flew from her bed, her heart seizing. Poppy was sitting up, her eyes wide with panic, her small chest struggling. Asthma. "Poppy, baby, breathe. Where's your bag? Where's the—" "In here." Luca was already at the door. He moved past her, not with panic, but with absolute calm. He was carrying Poppy's emergency nebulizer. He sat on the bed, plugged it into the wall, and calmly fitted the mask over Poppy's face. "It's okay, Poppy," he said, his voice low and soothing. "Just like we practiced. Breathe the smoke, be a dragon." Ava stood in the doorway, shaking. How did you—" "The air quality here is different from downtown. It's a common trigger," Luca said, his eyes never leaving Poppy. "I had McKinnon get her full medical history from her pediatrician yesterday. I made sure we had a machine in the house, and a spare, just in case." He had not just investigated her mother, he had investigated her daughter, but not as a target, as a charge. The next morning, Ava went to the bank in Tybee. 2 of Luca's men dressed as surfers stayed outside, the code from her tattoo, paired with a date Luca already had, opened the small, dusty box. There was no money. There was a small, military-grade hard drive, and beneath it, a letter. The handwriting was her mother's. "My dearest Ava, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the world has failed you. But I did not. This drive is my life's work. It is insurance. It is poison. It is a map of the filth that runs this city, from the North Pier Union to the polished halls of the Federal Public Integrity Office. They wash their money together. Do not give it to the police. Do not give it to the feds. They are the same. You will meet a man with eyes like a coming storm. He will be of the shadows, but his mother's light will be in him. He will say the word home. If he does, trust him. He is the only one who can keep you and my granddaughter safe. I love you. Be brave, my butterfly." Ava's hand went to her tattoo. A man with eyes like a coming storm. Luca. She returned to Seaglass. She found Luca in the library. She was standing at a crossroads. Give the drive to the IAOCB, who her mother explicitly said was corrupt, and risk being put in witness protection, losing Poppy forever. Or give it to Luca and dive headfirst into the shadows her mother had died trying to escape. Ava looked at the man who had calmed her daughter's asthma attack. She looked at the man who had not taken advantage of her in the simulation room. She placed the hard drive on his desk. "My mother called this poison," Ava said. "She said it details the North Pier Union's criminal ledger and how they launder money through the FPIO. Luca looked at the drive, then at her. "Before you take it," Ava said, "you should know. I already gave the original to Mr. McKinnon. He has instructions to keep it under seal. It is to be opened only by a court order, initiated by me. That one, Warzi, is a copy, encrypted, my mother's work." She had split the key. She had given him a tool, but she had kept the weapon for herself. A slow, appreciative smile spread across Luca Farrell's face. "Your mother," he said, "was a very smart woman." The invitation did not come as a call. It came as a polite, ironclad summons delivered by a man in a windbreaker to the gates of Seaglass. Special Agent Rowan Cade, the man from the church, requested Ava's presence at the East Coast Federal Office. Ava went. Flanked by Arlo McKinnon, Luca remained at the house, a silent, brooding promise to be waiting. The federal office was a monument to beige bureaucracy and fluorescent lighting. Agent Cade's office was small, sterile, and smelled of stale coffee. He offered Ava a seat, which she declined. McKinnon stood by the door, a silent, pinstriped sentinel. "Miss Moreno," Cade began, leaning back in his creaking chair, the picture of smug authority. "You're in a difficult position. We know you've been coerced by Mr. Farrell. We know about your mother. We are prepared to offer you full and total immunity, a new life for you and your daughter, far from here." "In exchange for what?" Ava's voice was ice. "Testimony. Full cooperation. We want Luca Farrell. We know you have access. Give him to us and this all goes away." Ava laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. "You mean, give you the man who is currently protecting me, in exchange for the protection of the same organization that let my mother die? The same organization that partnered with Ethan Hale to exploit my child?" Cade's smile faltered. "We use CIs. It's the cost of business." "And the FPIO?" Ava asked, taking a step toward his desk. "Is that the cost of business, too?" "The ledger my mother died for shows the North Pier Union washes its money through the Federal Public Integrity Office, your sister agency. So, you'll forgive me if I don't trust your immunity deal. I will not be a pawn in your interagency cover-up. I will not disappear." "What do you want, then?" Cade snapped, his composure gone. "A public trial," Ava said, her voice ringing in the small office, "with a jury. With the evidence presented in the light of day, I will not be trading one shadow for another." She turned and walked out, McKinnon following without a word. When they returned to Sea Glass, Ava recounted the entire conversation to Luca. He stood by the massive glass wall, watching a container ship glide past in the dusk. He listened without a single interruption, his face a mask carved from stone. When she finished, he simply nodded. He did not question her. He did not interfere. He picked up his phone and sent a single, encrypted text. Miles away, a gray mask team. 2 specialists who did not exist on any payroll began a 24-hour surveillance rotation on Agent Rowan Cade. The next blow came from the local news, a new leak, this one featuring Ethan Hale. He had been officially designated a material witness in the IAOCB's investigation, given full immunity for his fraudulent activities in exchange for his testimony. The report painted him as a brave man who had tried to save a woman already lost to the criminal underworld. It was the final straw. It proved that Cade was not just trying to pressure her, he was actively building a false case against her and Luca, using Ethan as his star. Ava found Luca and McKinnon in the library. "I want the marriage contract," she announced. McKinnon paused, his pen hovering over a document. Luca turned from the archive wall. "Not the protection agreement," Ava clarified, her voice shaking with resolve. "The real one. The one we file with the state. A legal, binding marriage." Luca's expression was unreadable. "Why?" "Because Ethan's testimony, combined with Cade's, will paint me as an unstable, compromised mother. They will use the Farfalla protection agreement as proof that you are controlling me. They will try to take Poppy." She laid her hands flat on the polished desk. "I want a real marriage, but with terms, my terms." McKinnon looked at her, impressed. "Go on." "1, all assets remain separate. What is his is his. What is mine is mine. 2, I retain full, sole, and permanent custody of Poppy. He will be her legal guardian, but only as a secondary, a failsafe. Should something happen to me, my signature is the only one required for her school, her health, her life." She took a breath and looked directly at Luca. "In exchange, I will do what my mother couldn't. I will file a civil suit against the North Pier Union, using my mother's ledger as evidence. I will be the lead witness. I will take them down in a public court, not as a mafia target, but as a grieving daughter. It was a declaration of war, but on her own terms. Luca was silent for a long moment. He walked to the desk, took the unsigned marriage license that had been sitting there for days, and picked up the pen. He signed his name Luca Farrell in sharp black ink. He pushed the paper toward her, his hand covering hers for a brief, electric second. "You lead," he said, his voice a low vow. "I'll watch your back." The syndicate's counterattack was swift and brutal. Within hours of the marriage license being filed, a new video hit the local news circuit. It was a masterpiece of malicious editing. Grainy footage of Ava at the simulation range, holding a weapon, a clip from the church, edited to look like she was smiling at Luca before Ethan said no. Audio clips from her phone calls with Ethan, manipulated to sound like she was luring him. The narrative was damning the Farfalla honey trap, a woman who had conspired with the Marrow Syndicate to entrap a federal informant. Ava's freelance graphic design clients, her only source of legitimate income, dried up overnight. Emails came in, polite and final, terminating her contracts. The public, which had been divided, now turned sharply against her. She stood in the library, watching the news anchors dissect her character, and felt the walls closing in. But the numbness was gone. It was replaced by a cold, sharp rage. She turned to Luca. "I need a laptop, a secure one, and a way to stream." "What are you doing?" "They took my voice," Ava said, logging into an anonymous, encrypted streaming platform. She set up a simple audio-only feed, her location completely masked. "I'm taking it back." She hit go live. Her voice, anonymous and clear, went out into the digital void. "My name is not important," she began, her words steady. "But my story is, the media is telling you I am a trap. The government is telling you I am a criminal. The truth is a butterfly. Let me tell you about the Farfalla Fund." The viewer count began to climb. 10, 100, 1,000. She did not mention the Mafia. She did not mention Luca. She just told the story of her mother, of a secret haven for children, and of a system so corrupt it had to destroy a ghost story to hide its own crimes. The live stream had ended hours ago, but the adrenaline was just now leaving Ava, replaced by a bone-deep tremor. The anonymous threats that followed her broadcast had been vile. But the last one, a direct call that had somehow bypassed Luca's security, had been chillingly specific. Rain lashed against the 3-inch thick glass of sea glass, turning the river into a churning, violent expanse. The house felt like a ship in a storm. Ava stood on the covered terrace, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the water. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and wet earth. She was shaking. The main door slid open, but she didn't turn. She knew his footsteps. Luca emerged from the darkness. He was not wearing a suit, but a simple dark sweater and trousers, making him seem larger, more real. He said nothing. He simply walked to her, took off the heavy, dry raincoat he was carrying, and draped it over her shoulders. It was impossibly warm, smelling faintly of him, cedar and clean linen. The weight of it was an anchor, a physical comfort that made her want to weep. "They said..." Ava's voice was rough. "They said they knew her ballet school. They said they'd wait for her." Luca's hand settled on her shoulder. Over the coat, his grip was firm, a silent transfer of strength. "They will not get within 500 yards of her school, or you. My team is already in place. The threat was a reaction. They're scared. Your broadcast scared them." She leaned her head back against the steel beam, closing her eyes. I'm so tired of being scared." "I know," he said, his voice a low rumble beside her. They stood in silence for a long time. The only sound, the percussive drumming of the rain on the roof and the distant howl of the wind. "Why do you do it?" she asked, turning to look at him. "The Farfalla, this." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze lost in the storm. He unbuttoned the cuff of his left sleeve and rolled it back, revealing his forearm. A long, puckered scar ran from his wrist bone almost to his elbow, white and silver against his olive skin. 1999, and he said, his voice flat. A Farfalla extraction. A girl, 8 years old, from a safe house in Atlanta that had been compromised. Her father was North Pier Union. He found out she was not his. He paused. We were getting her out. Her father's men found us. She was terrified. She ran the wrong way, toward the street. He traced the scar with one finger. I got to her, but not before one of them. He had a knife. I was 20 years old, and all I had was my mother's stories. I shielded her. He got my arm, but I got her out. Ava stared at the mark, a testament of violence turned into protection. I still feel so stupid, and she whispered, the admission torn from her. I look at Poppy, and I hate myself for ever believing Ethan. I let him into our lives. I let a monster read my daughter bedtime stories, just because I was lonely, just because I wanted normal. He did not seem like a monster, Lucas said, his voice devoid of judgment. He seemed like an answer. That is not your shame. It is his. He turned to face her fully, the rain creating a curtain of white noise around them, isolating them from the world. His eyes, the color of a coming storm, were fixed on her. The air, which had been cold, suddenly felt very warm, very close. He lifted a hand, his knuckles calloused, and gently brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was hesitant, respectful. His fingers lingered for a second, a spark on her skin. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her mouth, then returning to her eyes. He stopped, a breath away. So close she could feel the heat radiating from him. Ava, he breathed, his voice rough. You want this? It was not a demand. It was a question, the most respectful question she had ever been asked. She did not trust her voice. She just nodded, a small, definitive motion. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not the desperate, claiming kiss of a mafia boss. It was slow. It was reverent. It was a question, and an answer, and a promise. All at once. His lips were firm and warm, tasting of the night air and something elementally his. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her gently but with a possessive strength that made her knees weak. Her own hands, of their own accord, came up to rest on his chest. She grabbed the fabric of his sweater, holding on as if the storm might sweep her away. She felt the solid, steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath her palms. He deepened the kiss, and she met him, a sigh escaping her. It was a release of all the fear, all the tension, all the cold loneliness of the last few years. His other hand found her wrist, his thumb tracing the outline of the butterfly tattoo, not as a key, but as a part of her. They broke apart, but only slightly, resting their foreheads together, breathing the same air. You're cold, he murmured, his breath a warm cloud. He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers, and led her inside, away from the rain. He did not lead her to a bedroom. He led her to the library, the one warm room where the embers of a fire still glowed in the hearth. He sat on the deep, plush sofa and pulled her down with him, drawing a heavy cashmere throw from the back of the couch and wrapping it around them both. They sat in the near darkness, two people huddled together against the world. The only sounds were the rain on the roof and the beating of their hearts. The embers faded. The room grew darker. Ava turned her head, her cheek resting on his shoulder. She could feel his jaw, rough with stubble. She reached for the small, antique lamp on the table beside them. Her fingers brushed the switch. She looked at him, her eyes clear and resolute in the shadows. She turned the lamp off. Stay, she whispered. The next morning, the storm had broken. Sunlight, sharp and clean, streamed into the library. The door burst open and Poppy ran in, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Mommy, it's sunny. Can we see the... Poppy stopped. Her mother was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, her face peaceful. In the large armchair opposite, Lucas sat, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled up, watching the room. He did not look like he had slept. He looked like he had been standing guard. Poppy looked from her mother to the imposing man. Luca rose from the chair, not looming but kneeling. He brought himself down to her eye level, a move of such deliberate gentleness it took Ava's breath away, who was now stirring. "Good morning, Poppy," he said, his voice soft. Poppy clutched her rabbit. "Are you staying for breakfast, Mr. Butterfly?" "I am," he said. He glanced at Ava, who was watching them, her hair tousled, a small smile on her face. He looked back at Poppy. "But I want you to know something, a promise." He waited until the girl was fully focused. "Your mom's boundaries, and your boundaries," he said. His voice clear and absolute. "They are my law, always." Ava sat up, the blanket pooling in her lap. She smiled, a real smile, bright as the morning. She looked down at her wrist. The sunlight caught the ink of the butterfly. It was no longer a wound from the past or a key to a vault. It was a vow, silent and strong, binding her to the man who kept his promises in the storm. The air in the private ballet studio was serene, smelling of lemon oil and rosin. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a bubble of normalcy that Luca had arranged. Ava sat on a bench, watching Poppy, in a pink leotard, attempt a wobbly plie at the bar. The piece shattered when the studio's frosted glass door swung open. Two men in dark blue windbreakers with Port Authority emblazoned on the back entered. They did not look like they were lost. "Ma'am," the first man said, his eyes scanning the room, cold and quick. "We have a report of a gas leak in this building. We need to evacuate. We'll take the child for you." He moved toward Poppy. Ava was on her feet instantly, blocking him. "No," she said. "We'll leave together." "Ma'am, it's an emergency." The man's partner moved to flank her. This was wrong. This was not an evacuation. This was an ambush. "Poppy!" Ava yelled, her voice sharp with a command she had practiced. "Button now." Poppy, her eyes wide with fear, did not hesitate. Her small hand slapped the yellow butterfly bracelet on her wrist, pressing the hidden SOS. The first man lunged. At Sea Glass, Luca was in the library, looking over the encrypted copy of the ledger. On his desk, a dedicated tablet flashed from green to crimson. A map of Savannah pinpointed Poppy's location. A 90-second audio buffer began to play. "Ma'am, it's an emergency." Luca was moving before the sentence finished. He hit the comms on his desk. "Erebus team, active code red. They are at the studio. They are in the studio." His team, already staged in a black van 2 streets over, responded in less than 90 seconds, but the studio was already empty. The 2 port cops were North Pier Union, working with a dirty local precinct. They shoved Ava and Poppy into an unmarked cargo van, the doors slamming shut, plunging them into darkness. The van fishtailed, tires screaming, speeding away from the city center and toward the industrial labyrinth of the container port. The van screeched to a halt in a canyon of rust-colored steel. The doors were ripped open. Ava and Poppy were dragged out, the air thick with the smell of diesel and salt water. A man was holding Poppy, his hand clamped over her mouth. The other man, the one who had spoken, grabbed Ava's arm. "The boss wants the girl," he snarled. "You're just collateral." He started to drag her toward a dark container, the training. Ava's mind went cold and clear, back to the simulation room, back to Luca's breath on her ear. She stopped anticipating the recoil. She drove her heel down onto the man's instep, the bone crunching under her boot. As he roared and his grip slackened, she spun, driving her elbow into his floating ribs. He doubled over, the air rushing from his lungs. The man holding Poppy turned. Surprised, he raised a hand to Ava, but she was already moving. She did not aim for his face. She aimed for the arm holding her daughter. She used her full weight, striking a precise, debilitating blow to the nerve bundle on his forearm, just as she had been taught. His arm went numb, his grip spasming open. Poppy fell free. "Poppy, run!" Ava screamed, shoving her daughter behind a massive tire. "Very impressive, Ava. I never knew you had it in you." Ava froze. The voice was thin, reedy, and full of a terror she recognized. Ethan Hale stepped out from between two containers. He was a wreck, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. "Ethan," she breathed. "He sold you to them, Ava," a new voice said, deep, cold, and utterly in control. Luca Farrell emerged from the shadows, flanked by two of his Erebus team, all clad in black. They were ghosts. "But he also sold you to the IAOCB," Luca continued, his eyes locked on Ethan. "A double trap, very ambitious." Ethan's face went white. This wasn't... I had a deal." "You did," Luca said. He tapped the small comms in his ear. "Now." A series of dull thwacks echoed overhead. The floodlights illuminating the container yard popped, one after another, plunging the area into a chaotic strobe of emergency lights. The North Pier security cameras, perched on the cranes, went dark. Luca's team was moving fast, neutralizing the enemy's eyes, ensuring a clean rescue. Ethan was trapped between the syndicate and the men he had just betrayed. Ava had her phone in her back pocket. Her hand, shaking, pulled it free. She hit the audio recorder. "You bastard," she screamed at Ethan, the word tearing from her throat. "You set us up. You sold your own son's name to Cade. You sold my daughter to them." "I had to," Ethan shrieked, his voice cracking. "It was the only way. Cade promised me immunity. I deliver you. I deliver Luca walking into a trap, and I walk free, the North Pier. They just wanted the key. They wanted the girl to make you talk. I was getting my life back. Cade gets Luca, they get you, and I am gone." It was a full confession. The entire corrupt deal with the IAOCB laid bare. A gunshot cracked the air. It was not from Luca's team. Ethan looked down. A small, dark circle was blossoming on his shirt. He staggered back, his eyes wide with a final, terminal surprise. He looked toward the dark, open water of the docks. He tried to run. "They promised..." He gurgled. He scrambled over a pile of nets. A second shot. He pitched forward, falling from the concrete pier and vanishing into the black, oily water below. Silence. Then, the sound of sirens, screaming toward them, the IAOCB. Agent Cade's team burst from their vehicles, guns raised, sweeping the yard, arriving just 30 seconds too late. Cade saw Luca, Ava, and the child. He saw no one else. "What happened here? Where is Hale?" Cade demanded. One of his own agents looked at his comms, feigning confusion. "We had a technical delay, sir. Signal interference. We got here as fast as we could." Luca ignored them all. He walked to Ava, who was clutching a trembling Poppy. He wrapped his own jacket around them both. Ava's hand was shaking as she held up her phone. "I got it, Luca," she whispered, her voice raw. "I got it all." She hit send on an encrypted file, addressed to a trusted investigative reporter at the Savannah Ledger. Hours later, at Sea Glass, Luca stood with his head of security. "The timing was too perfect," Luca said, his voice dangerously low. "The North Pier Union knew exactly when to grab them. The IAOCB knew exactly when to be late to save Ethan, and just in time to silence me." He looked at the security roster. The ballet studio had been a clean sight. Only his inner circle knew the exact time of that lesson. One of his men, a bodyguard who had been with him for 10 years, had confirmed the route just that morning. "The leak," Luca said, "is not from the outside. It's in this room." The kidnapping attempt had shattered the fragile piece of sea glass. Poppy was safe, sleeping in a new, more secure room in the center of the house, but Ava was vibrating with a cold, analytical energy. She was done being a target. In the pre-dawn hours, she was in the library, the encrypted hard drive plugged into a secure laptop. Luca's tech team had decrypted the files. It was a dizzying map of laundered money, flowing from the North Pier Union's extortion rackets directly into the public coffers of the Federal Public Integrity Office. But her mother's letter, it nagged at her. A man with eyes like a coming storm. She had assumed it was about Luca, But what if it was a final piece of code? She looked at her wrist, at the Roman numerals. She had thought they were just an ID, but in her mother's letter, a few words were capitalized oddly. See the date. Remember the time. Luca, she said, her voice hoarse. He was across the room, reviewing security logs, not having slept. What is it? The numbers, they aren't just a code. They're a date and a number, my mother's birthday, and a number. What if it's not the only box? 2 hours later, they were back at the small bank in Tybee, this time in the manager's office. McKinnon had presented a warrant, a favor called in from a state judge. The box number Ava had pulled from the tattoo, V62562, was real. The manager retrieved a second, larger box. Inside, there was no hard drive. There was a single, thick, vellum document, bound in a faded blue ribbon. It was the original charter for the Farfalla patronage from 1994. And on the final page, among the signatures of the founding board, was a sweeping, authoritative signature, Augustus T. Rourke, Director of Outreach, Federal Public Integrity Office. Ava's blood ran cold. My God, Luca! They weren't just partners in corruption. Luca breathed, his eyes blazing. They were founders. The FPIO helped create the Farfalla Fund, used it as a cover, and then, when my mother got in their way, they let the North Pier Union burn it down, painting her as the criminal. This changed everything. They weren't just fighting a corrupt agent, they were fighting the entire federal apparatus that had endorsed and then destroyed her mother's life. As they drove back, Luca's phone buzzed with an update from his head of security. We found it, boss. In the Seaglass security hub, the audio from the ballet studio attack was on a loop. The mole's calm, the security chief said, pointing. His name is Marco, 10-year man. He claimed a radio dead zone, but listen. He isolated Marco's feed, a 3-second burst of static, right before the North Pier men entered. He wasn't in a dead zone, the chief said. He was on a dead zone. That's static. It's the signature of the IAOCB's scrambler. He was talking to Cade. Luca's face was terrifying in its stillness. That evening, Ava walked into the kitchen, where Marco was on his rotation, watching Poppy eat a snack. Marco, Ava said, her voice clear and carrying. We're moving Poppy tonight, a new location up in the hills. Luca is handling the route now. Marco's eyes flickered, just for a millisecond. Very good, ma'am. I'll get the car ready. No need. Luca's voice came from the doorway. He had already, silently, replaced the entire kitchen detail with his Erebus team. We won't be needing you. They confronted him in the wine cellar. It was cold, and the racks of priceless bottles seemed to absorb the light, creating long, deep shadows. She's not moving, Ava said, by stepping in front of Marco, blocking his exit. Poppy is safe, but you're not. Ma'am, I don't... Stop, Ava snapped, her voice echoing off the stone. How much did Cade offer you? What's the price for a 6-year-old girl? Marco's face crumpled. You're the one, Ava said, her voice low and full of venom, who sells children to the North Pier. I didn't, he cried. It wasn't... Not for money, my sister. She's sick in Manila. She needs a visa, a green card for medical trials. Cade. Agent Cade said he could get her one. He just needed information. He said no one would get hurt. He just wanted a way to get to the boss, to trap him. And the FPIO, Luca's voice boomed from the darkness. He stepped out from behind a rack of Bordeaux, holding a small digital recorder, its red light blinking. Marco flinched. They were in on it. Cade said the FPIO took a cut from the North Pier to manage the Farfalla problem. They all just wanted a piece. I just wanted to save my sister. Get him out of my house, Ava said, turning her back on him. An hour later, the three of them, Ava, Luca, McKinnon, were in the library. The FPIO charter was on the desk. The confession was on the recorder. Ethan's confession was on Ava's phone. We have them, McKinnon said. We can leak this. We can destroy Cade, destroy the FPIO's reputation, and force the North Pier into hiding." "No," Ava said. Luca looked at her. "No more shadows," she said, her voice resonating with her mother's strength. "No more leaks, no more deals in the dark. That's their game. We are going to take the charter, the ledger, Ethan's confession, and Marco's recording, and we are going to walk into the state attorney general's office. We are going to demand a grand jury, and we are going to burn them all down in a courtroom." Luca stared at her. The woman who had, in 1 week, overturned his entire world. The Marrow Syndicate did not do public justice. They handled their own. He looked at the portrait of his mother on the wall, the founder of the Farfalla. He reached across the desk and put his hand over Ava's. "Against all tradition," Luca said. "We do it your way, in the light." McKinnon was on the phone for 20 minutes. When he hung up, his face was grim. The state's attorney is intrigued. He's willing to convene a secret grand jury." "But," Ava asked, "but he doesn't trust the recordings. He says they're inadmissible without a live witness. He will only proceed if the star witness appears in person. They want you, Ava, on the record in a room. The risk just went from high to absolute." The wind did not just blow, it screamed. Tropical storm Ophelia had turned the Savannah River into a churning, angry maw. Rain fell in horizontal sheets, metallic and cold, at the sea glass. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the storm outside mirroring the battle to come. An urgent, encrypted message had come from McKinnon's contacts. The North Pier Union was panicking. Spooked by the grand jury summons, they were liquidating their leader. A shadowy figure known only as the Doc King was moving their central operations and their primary evidence ledger onto a Panamanian cargo ship set to sail with the storm surge. "This is it," McKinnon said, his face illuminated by the glow of a radar screen. "They're running." "My team can intercept," DeLuca said, his voice a low command. "We'll seize the ship." "No," Ava said. Both men turned to look at her. She was dressed in dark, practical rain gear, her hair pulled back in a tight braid. She looked like a warrior. "The state's attorney was clear," Ava said, her voice cutting through the room. "The case hinges on my testimony, the ledger my mother created. She covered the physical drive in a hand-tooled leather case. She wrote a quote on it, 'If I cannot stand in court and testify, under oath, that I recognize her handwriting on the original drive, the defense will claim it's a fabrication. They will say you planted it. I have to go. I have to be the one to identify it.'" "Absolutely not," Luca countered, his voice iron. "It's a tactical nightmare. It's a Category 1 storm and a boat full of armed men." "It's a legal one." "Luca," she shot back, "we are doing this my way. Remember, in the light, that means following the rules of evidence. I go, or we have no case." His jaw tightened. He looked at her, at the unshakable resolve in her eyes. He was seeing the woman his mother would have saved, and the woman who was now saving him. He gave a sharp nod. "You don't leave my side. Not for an inch. Erebus team. Legal protocols only. We are not assassins tonight. We are officers of the court." The docks were a vision of chaos. Cranes swayed in the wind. The cargo ship, the Odessa, was straining at its moorings. Luca's team, dressed in black, non-reflective gear, moved like shadows. Using the storm as cover, McKinnon was with a local magistrate on the pier, holding a sealed emergency warrant from the state AG. They boarded the ship not with guns, but with heavy-duty zip ties, mag lights, and the warrant. It was a legal heist. They moved through the lurching corridors, encountering sparse resistance. The North Pier men were sailors, not soldiers, and they quickly surrendered to the overwhelming, silent force, their hands bound before they could raise an alarm. The bridge, however, was a different story. They burst in. The ship's captain was at the helm, alongside the Dock King, a large, brutal man with a face like scarred timber. He was holding a small, steel briefcase. "The warrant," Luca announced, his voice booming over the wind. "Sealed by the state. We are seizing this vessel and its contents." The Dock King laughed. "You have no jurisdiction out here. Farrell, the law ends at the waterline." He saw Ava, standing just behind Luca, her face pale but set. He recognized her. He had seen the pictures. "Ah," he sneered, "the little butterfly, the source of all the trouble." In one swift, desperate motion, he lunged, he grabbed Ava, pulling her in front of him, a human shield. The steel briefcase clattered to the floor. A long, wicked-looking blade appeared in his hand. He pressed it not to her throat, but directly against her left wrist, the blade's edge finding the ink of her tattoo. "The price of the seal," he hissed in her ear, the stench of his breath like old bait. "You and your mother. You cost me everything. I'm gonna tell your man to back off, or I'll carve this off your arm." Ava's heart was a trapped bird, but she did not look at the knife. She looked at Luca. His face was a mask of murderous rage, his hand hovering over the knife on his own belt. She did it. The hand signal his mother had taught the Farfalla children. A closed fist, index finger and pinky extended, tapping the temple. Danger. Listen, do not act. Luca saw it. The rage in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying calm. He took his hand off his weapon. He slowly unclipped his own knife and let it clatter to the steel deck. "Your call, Ava," he said, the words cutting. "You're in charge." The Dock King faltered, confused by the sudden reversal of power. That was all she needed. Ava's left hand, the one not being threatened, was at her side. Her thumb found the strap of the tactical watch Luca had given her. It was linked to Poppy's bracelet, now safe at Sea Glass. She pressed the SOS. It was not meant to call for help. It was designed to create chaos. The signal, routed through a satellite, was programmed to flood the local radio frequencies, including the ship's navigation and comms. A deafening, high-pitched screech like 1,000 fax machines dying erupted from every speaker on the bridge. The navigation screens flashed, a cascade of white noise. The Dock King roared, momentarily deafened, his head instinctively turning toward the sound. He flinched. It was the only opening Luca needed. He moved like a cobra. It was not a fight. It was a removal. He grabbed the Dock King's wrist, not the knife, and applied a focused, shattering pressure to the joint. The bone snapped. The knife dropped. In the same motion, Luca spun the man around, slamming him against the console, and one of the Erebus team had him cuffed. The entire exchange took 2 seconds. Thunder cracked, so loud it shook the ship, as if the sky itself was applauding. The rain on the windows was a gray sheet. The bridge was silent, save for the wind. Ava was breathing in great, shuddering gasps. She stumbled forward into Luca. His arms came around her, pulling her against his chest, his hands protective in her hair. She buried her face in his neck, inhaling the scent of him and the storm. "It's done," he murmured, his voice rough. "It's secure." The steel briefcase was on the floor. Ava knelt, her hands shaking, and opened it. Inside, nestled in foam, was the hard drive. It was in a leather case, and on the front, in faded gold ink, was her mother's handwriting. "Freedom is not escape. It is a choice made in the light." The doors to the bridge burst open again. Agent Rowan Cade stood there, flanked by IAOCB agents in full tactical gear, their weapons raised. "This is a federal operation," Cade shouted over the wind. "We are seizing all evidence under the authority of the Patriot Act. Give me the drive. Farrell." Ava stood up, the hard drive clutched in her hand. Luca stepped in front of her, shielding her. He looked at Cade, his eyes full of contempt. The rain and seawater dripped from his hair. "Your authority ends here, Cade," Luca said, his voice a low growl. "This is a state-level homicide and corruption case, and we are not in the shadows anymore." He nodded to the magistrate and who stepped forward. "Agent Cade," the magistrate said, his voice thin but powerful. "This evidence is under seal by the state of Georgia. You will lower your weapons, or I will have you arrested for obstruction." Cade's face was purple with rage, his ambush spoiled. It was a tense, armed, legal standoff in the middle of a hurricane on a captured ship. The Georgia State courtroom was not grand, but it was suffocating. The air, thick with Savannah's oppressive humidity, vibrated with the tension of a packed house. Every seat was taken. The jury, 12 men and women, carefully selected a teacher, a mechanic, 2 nurses. A shrimper watched with unreadable faces as Ava Moreno took the stand. The Doc King's defense attorney, a sharp man in an expensive suit, paced before her. "Mrs. Farrell," he said, his voice dripping with insinuation, letting the new name hang in the air. "You married your co-conspirator. You expect this jury to believe you are a victim, when you are, in fact, the new queen of the Marrow Syndicate." Ava did not look at the lawyer. She looked at the jury. "No," she said, her voice clear and carrying. "I am a mother, and I am a daughter, and the man who just called me queen works for the men who murdered my mother, Isabel Moreno." The defense objected, but the tone was set. "The defense," Ava continued, turning to the judge, "claims I am a part of a criminal conspiracy, but the real conspiracy is the one between the North Pier Union and the Federal Public Integrity Office." On cue, Arlo McKinnon presented the first piece of evidence, the original. Vellum Charter for the Farfalla Patronage, from 1994. "This," Ava said, her voice resonating, "proves the fund was a legal, legitimate, charitable organization. And if you look at the final signature of endorsement," the projector zoomed in, "that is the signature of Augustus Rourke, then director of the FPIO." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. "The FPIO did not just collude with the North Pier," Ava explained. "They built the organization they later claimed to be hunting, using my mother's network as a cover. And when my mother found out, they let the North Pier silence her." The defense attorney sputtered, but the damage was done. McKinnon then introduced the doctored media clips, followed by the raw, unedited footage from the simulation range and the church, proving the FPIO had actively fed a false narrative to the press. Then came the audio. First, Ethan's panicked, screaming confession on the docks implicating Agent Cade. Then, Marco's tearful, desperate confession from the wine cellar, admitting Cade had blackmailed him, and confirming the FPIO's profit-sharing arrangement. The judge, his face grim, paused the proceedings. He looked at the state attorney. "This court," he announced, "is formally requesting the Department of Justice open an immediate internal investigation into the procedural and ethical conduct of the Savannah IAOCB." It was a total rout. As part of a complex deal, McKinnon announced Luca Farrell's own agreement. He would plead to minor civil charges, financial reporting errors related to his complex holdings paying a significant fine. In exchange, the Marrow Syndicate would fully and permanently endow the Farfalla Fund, which would be reorganized, effective immediately, as a public, court-supervised trust. The shadows were being dragged into the light. The defense was broken. The Doc King sat silent and gray. The prosecutor asked Ava for a final statement. She stood, not looking at the criminals, but at the jury. She held up the leather-bound hard drive, her mother's final gift. "When I found this," she said, her voice thick, "I also found a letter from my mother. She said, 'Freedom is not escape. It is a choice made in the light.'" The courtroom was utterly, profoundly silent. The jury returned in less than 1 hour, guilty on all counts. The Doc King and his associates received maximum sentences. The corrupt FPIO officials were indicted by the state attorney before the sun set. The judge, in his final ruling, looked directly at Ava. "Miss Moreno Farrell," he said, "you have survived an ordeal that this court finds horrifying. That mark on your wrist," he nodded toward her tattoo, "was meant to be a secret. It has been held over you as a threat and used against you as a slander. Today, this court declares it a testament of justice." He banged his gavel. "Furthermore, this court issues a permanent, lifetime order of protection for you and your daughter, Poppy Moreno, Any unauthorized approach by any agency, local or federal, will be held in contempt. You are free." The courtroom doors burst open. The press swarmed, a wall of shouting and flashing lights. Ava walked out onto the high stone steps, blinded by the sun. Luca was beside her, a solid, immovable presence, his hand on her back. She stopped. She turned to him. Oblivious to the cameras, to the noise, the entire world fell away until it was just the two of them, in the eye of the storm. She reached up, her hand shaking, and took his. He looked down, surprised by her bold, public move. "At the church," she whispered, her voice for him alone. "Ethan said no. And you said, she's mine." His eyes, the color of the storm, were unreadable. "Ava." "Now," she said, a brilliant, tear-filled smile breaking across her face. "Now, it's my turn to say I do." She rose on her toes, pulled his head down to hers, and kissed him. It was not a kiss of shadow or desperation. It was a kiss of light and choice and victory, right there on the courthouse steps for the entire world to see. The wedding, the real one, was not on the steps. It was a week later, in the orangery at Sea Glass, the air sweet with citrus. Poppy, as the only guest and maid of honor, through paper butterflies that fluttered in the river breeze, the Isabel Moreno house, the new Farfalla shelter, opened its doors to its first family. That night, Ava stood by the great glass window, the lights of Savannah glittering across the water. She rolled up her sleeve, her fingers gently tracing the butterfly, no longer a brand or a key, but just hers. Luca came up behind her. He said nothing. He simply placed his hand over hers, his palm warm, covering her wrist, his pulse, steady and strong, beat against hers, two heartbeats layered together, finding a single rhythm. She leaned back against his chest, her eyes closing. "Home," she whispered. "Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to connect with you, so please comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from. And share your thoughts. Please subscribe to the Mafia Boss Story channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people."